1941. A brilliant German general arrives in North Africa with a small, under-equipped force, and within weeks, he sends the entire British army into a chaotic, humiliating retreat across hundreds of miles of open desert. This is the story of Rommel's rampage, the opening chapter of the Desert War, and the moment Erwin Rommel earned the nickname that would follow him for the rest of history, the Desert Fox. In just a matter of weeks, in the spring of 1941, Rommel turned a losing Axis position into one of the most stunning military reversals of the entire Second World War, catching both his enemies and his own superiors completely off guard. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a like if you want more deep dives into the most dramatic campaigns of military history. And I genuinely want to know, where in the world are you watching this from tonight? Drop your country in the comments, I read every single one. Let's rewind to early 1941, when North Africa looked like it was already slipping out of Axis hands entirely. Before Rommel ever set foot in North Africa, Italy had already launched its own invasion of Egypt from its colony in Libya back in September 1940, hoping to seize the vital Suez Canal from British control. It went catastrophically wrong. British and Commonwealth forces, though badly outnumbered, launched a devastating counterattack in December 1940 known as Operation Compass. Within weeks, British tanks smashed through Italian defenses, capturing tens of thousands of Italian prisoners, along with huge stockpiles of equipment and supplies. The Italian 10th Army, which had once numbered over 150,000 men, was virtually destroyed as a fighting force. By February 1941, Italian forces in Libya were on the verge of total collapse. British troops had advanced hundreds of miles, and it genuinely looked like the entire Italian colony of Libya might fall within weeks, potentially knocking Italy out of the North African War altogether. Adolf Hitler, unwilling to let his Italian allies suffer such a humiliating and strategically damaging defeat, made the decision to send German forces to prop up the crumbling front. He selected a relatively obscure but aggressive commander named Erwin Rommel to lead this new force, which would become known as the Afrika Korps. Nobody, including many of Rommel's own superiors back in Berlin, expected what was about to happen next. Rommel landed in Tripoli in February 1941 with only a fraction of the troops and equipment he would eventually command. His initial orders from German high command were cautious and defensive, simply to stabilize the front and prevent total Italian collapse in Libya. Rommel had other plans entirely. Studying the battlefield and the exhausted, overextended British forces facing him, he recognized an incredible opportunity. The British, having advanced so rapidly during Operation Compass, had stretched their supply lines to breaking point, and many of their best experienced troops had actually been withdrawn from North Africa entirely to help defend Greece against a looming German invasion. Against the explicit caution of his own superiors, Rommel launched an aggressive offensive in late March 1941, using clever deception tactics, including fake tanks built from wooden frames and truck chassis, to convince British reconnaissance that his forces were far larger and more powerful than they actually were. The gamble worked spectacularly. British forces, already weakened and stretched thin, began falling back rapidly under the sheer speed and aggression of Rommel's advance. Within days, what had been a slow, cautious probing action turned into a full-blown offensive that nobody on the Allied side had anticipated. If this bold gamble is already impressing you, make sure to smash that like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more curious minds. Throughout April 1941, Rommel's forces advanced with stunning speed across the Libyan desert, recapturing territory that British and Commonwealth troops had spent months painstakingly conquering just weeks earlier. British commanders, caught completely off guard by the ferocity and pace of the German advance, struggled desperately to organize any kind of coherent defensive line. The retreat quickly became chaotic. Entire British units found themselves cut off and surrounded, as Rommel's fast-moving armored columns outpaced their ability to retreat in good order. Two senior British generals, Philip Neame and Richard O'Connor, the very commander who had orchestrated the earlier destruction of Italian forces, were both captured by German patrols during the confused retreat, a deeply embarrassing loss for British military leadership. By mid-April, Rommel's forces had pushed the British almost entirely out of Libya, advancing all the way to the Egyptian border in an astonishingly short period of time. The only major obstacle remaining was the heavily fortified port city of Tobruk, which British and Australian forces had managed to hold on to despite being completely surrounded and cut off from the rest of the retreating Allied army. Rommel launched repeated assaults against Tobruk throughout April and into May, but the defenders, though isolated, fought with remarkable stubbornness and determination, refusing to surrender despite constant bombardment and repeated infantry attacks against their perimeter. Tobruk became an unlikely symbol of Allied resistance during this otherwise disastrous period. The garrison, made up largely of Australian troops alongside British and other Commonwealth units, endured relentless German and Italian attacks while completely cut off from resupply by land, relying entirely on risky nighttime naval convoys to bring in food, ammunition, and reinforcements. Rommel, frustrated by his inability to quickly crush this stubborn pocket of resistance, found himself forced to divert significant resources and attention toward the siege, resources that he desperately wanted to use for a full-scale invasion of Egypt itself. This unexpected delay at Tobruk would prove strategically important, buying valuable time for British forces to regroup and reinforce their defensive lines further east along the Egyptian border. Despite Rommel's aggressive tactics and repeated assaults, Tobruk held firm throughout the spring of 1941, denying the Desert Fox the complete and total victory he had been chasing since launching his surprise offensive weeks earlier. The siege would ultimately drag on for over 8 months before finally being relieved later that year. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video if you're learning something new today. It truly helps this channel keep sharing these dramatic stories from military history. By the end of spring 1941, Rommel had achieved an extraordinary reversal of fortune in North Africa. In just a matter of weeks, he had transformed a collapsing Italian position into a dominant Axis advance that pushed British forces almost entirely out of Libya and back to the very borders of Egypt itself. His reputation soared almost overnight, both among his own troops and, grudgingly, among his British opponents, who began referring to him with genuine respect as the Desert Fox, acknowledging his brilliant use of deception, speed, and aggressive maneuver warfare in the vast open terrain of the North African desert. However, Rommel's success came with significant strategic costs. His supply lines were now dangerously overextended, stretching hundreds of miles back to distant Libyan ports, making his forces vulnerable to any determined British counterattack. The unresolved siege at Tobruk also remained a persistent thorn in his side, tying down troops and resources he desperately needed elsewhere. The spring 1941 campaign set the stage for over 2 more years of brutal back-and-forth fighting across the North African desert, a seesawing conflict that would eventually culminate in the decisive Allied victory at El Alamein in late 1942, effectively ending Axis ambitions in the region for good. Rommel's rampage through North Africa in the spring of 1941 remains one of the most dramatic and studied military reversals of the entire Second World War, a masterclass in aggressive maneuver warfare achieved with genuinely limited resources against a numerically stronger opponent. It cemented Rommel's legendary reputation as one of the most skilled tactical commanders of the war, while also exposing the serious logistical vulnerabilities that would ultimately doom the Axis cause in North Africa over the following 2 years of brutal, seesawing desert combat. The very speed and boldness that made his spring offensive so devastating also planted the seeds of the supply crises that would haunt his campaigns for the rest of the war in the desert. If you learned something today, make sure you're subscribed, hit that like button, and follow this channel for more forgotten stories from military history. And once again, let me know in the comments, what country are you watching this from tonight? I love seeing how far these stories reach across the globe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.